Shalom, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday night. It's a beautiful night down here in Texas. We're at 66 degrees and going to go all the way down to freezing at 55. So we can't complain about winter right now. But as we do, I want to I, I'm the topic tonight is basically we're going to be finishing up the the commissioning of our prophet. So as we go through this, understand. Now, this chapter, well, it locks in Ezekiel as a prophetic person who has a purpose, because that's the important thing here is the fact that he has a purpose. Now, we'll all look at the story of Ezekiel eating the scroll, or we did last week, and that whole encounter. But now the question is, what does that make Ezekiel? Well, in verses 12 to 15, it begins by saying, a wind lifted me up, and I heard behind me the sound of great uproar. Blessed is the Lord, or the glory of the Lord from his place. Then the sound of the wings of the living beings were heard touching one another, and the sound of the wheels opposite them, and the sound of the great uproar. And a wind lifted me and took me, and I went and bittered in the wrath of my spirit, and the hand of the Lord became strong upon me. Now, this is one of those psychologically, well, it's an honest verse. He's really telling you what he's thinking. Now, three things are happening to him at this point. One is he's being carried, and that's not on his own momentum. He's actually bitter, and yet God's hand is so strong upon him, he can't change. Now, mystically, this is about a boor, but not a comforting a boor. A boor is a spirit that joins you. Now, the divine presence overrides Ezekiel's inner resistance. And we're seeing what the Zohar later calls the soul protesting while the mission proceeds. Now, in our story, then, prophecy is not always ecstasy. And in this case, it's a burden tied to obedience that's going on that we're looking at. I want you to next notice what comes next. And then I came to them of the captivity of Tel Abib. Now that lived that they lived by the river Habar, and to where they lived, and I sat there overwhelmed amongst them for 7 days. Now remember, he's not talking; he's just sitting there with them. So he's just almost out of it. But 7 days, remember, is a period of time which we normally think of in Hebrew as Shiva, or the idea of of funeral or the death of somebody. This is really enormous. In fact, I'm going to do a bird walk. And a bird walk for me is something that's attached to what I've been reading that I think will be important to you too. Now, God places Ezekiel at Tel Abib. The Tel in Abib is about a flood. So this is the tell of the flood. Now, a tell describes an artificial mound of many layers of destruction and rebuilding. I spent a month in a place like this called Tel Tamar. Tel Tamar is in Israel, and it's in the desert, Negev desert, southwest of the Dead Sea. You can find it written in Deuteronomy chapter 1, but there it's called a boat. Such mounds would obviously be found to be desirable and contented locations. Now, I'm not wandering off too far because I've stopped at this exact place because Tel Aviv is one of those places where geography becomes theology. It's like, or it's slow. It slows it down and separates it from the text itself. But what the name implies and what the traditions whisper, this place is a significant place. Tel Aviv, the name already teaching us something. And again, it's about the river Habar that it's going. And there was no real river called Habar. There was a canal that may have been this particular river. Now, archaeologists and symbolically, a tell is a story of time stacked vertically. Now, the second word matters just as much, Abib. Now, Abib can lead us to, or well, lead us into many different stories. It can speak of a spring. It can speak of new grain, because Abib is also the month of Nisan. It's the month of the Exodus, or the moment before a harvest, after life has just pushed through the soil. I think Tel Habib is this case means a mound of ruins. That is not uh, accidental in my mind. It's an exile sitting on top of buried worlds, yet named or renewed. Now, Ezekiel did not receive his calling in Jerusalem, but he did receive it here at this tell. I have a map that I want to show you, and we'll see if we can find it quickly. Where it is at my map? There's my whiteboard, existing whiteboards. Oh, now I need an error. Try it again. There it is. Hopefully you can all see it from where you're at. This is a map that I think is probably as accurate as any map that I could find. But Abib probably was somewhere around here, probably. Now, Babylon, remember, was between the two rivers. There's Babylon. Now, Babylon plays a large part in the story, but not directly. If you go down to almost the Persian Gulf, you come into the city called Ur. Do you remember Ur? That's where Abraham started. That's where he began. So everything is really located along this area. And it's significant that what we're doing is following what's going on. And I say this because, well, let me close this out. I say this because of something that's been in my heart for quite a while. Broadly speaking, that's a loaded question or answer. They're in a land of Shinar. They're in the land of Shinar, which takes us back to Genesis chapter 10. Biblically, Shinar was located at the southern tip of Mesopotamia, and Mesopotamia ended at the Persian Gulf. Now, the Habar River, or the canal, places the exiles in Babylonia. And I believe that the map, well, this was a place where we know that the ruler in the days of Ezekiel was Nebuchadnezzar. So geographically, Ezekiel's community is inside a world system that began at Shinar, not necessarily on the exact mound as Babel, but within the same civilizational basin. Shinar is not just where Babel happened. It represents humanity's first post-flood attempt to, again, centralize power, establish unity within it without obedience, ascend without permission, and a tower built to avoid dispersion. Quite a bit. Now, I want you to note the irony here. Babel, let us make a name for ourselves. Ezekiel, the prophet, whose mouth is shut, can't speak. Babel, well, is vertical arrogance. Ezekiel fostered downward silence. Babel, bricks were standing up. but the tell reveals that it goes down. You can see the back and forth. You can see the rebellion that's going on here. And I want you to understand that this hasn't ended yet. Only a few years ago, there was a man who thought he was Nebuchadnezzar, who finally found out that he wasn't, and he was soon captured and hung. Now, there's a flood tradition where the bones of those before the flood actually settled. Now, speaking this way, I'm stepping into Midrashic and Mesopotamian history. So it's not ex explicit Tanakh, and that's okay if we name it honestly. So in ancient Near Eastern thought, the flood was not forgotten. It left behind cosmic trauma, as a certain land were remembered as a depository of antediluvian memories. Now, later Jewish mystical sources will treat Mesopotamia as the land with residual judgment and a place where earlier worlds collapsed. So when I posit the idea that the Jews were sitting where the bones of the flood victims were, textually, I'm probably not accurate, but symbolically, well, I'm absolutely resonating. They were sitting on accumulated ruins in the land of repeated arrogance and pride, where human self deification keeps going. Now, in Israel, where I was at, Tel Tamar, which was actually, if you go to go to Deuteronomy chapter 1, the city is called Havot. It was a place where Moses had camped after leading the people all the way back to Israel. But understand, it's more than that. Right now, they're digging past the Moses area and they're looking for Abraham. They believe Abraham lived in this area too. So there's a lot of stories that go on these tells. Now, do you remember the story of Nebuchadnezzar's statue? That was what, chapter 3 of Daniel. There we had the same pattern. Daniel 3 places the statue on the plain of Dura, just outside the walls of Babylon. Now that statue became an image of an empire. It was a human attempt to freeze time. Now overlay that picture on Ezekiel sitting there silently on that tell. Daniel's friends stood silently before a furnace meant to kill them. And anyone attempting to place God above Nebuchadnezzar would die there. Now that was an incident earlier in Babylon where the king became angry with the young man from Abraham, who destroyed the idols in his father's shop. Now he too was forced into a fiery furnace. Both refused to worship the idol. Same soil, same spiritual diseases, different responses. Do you understand why Ezekiel must sit there? This is actually the key integration point, as Ezekiel does not begin speaking until after he has sat for 7 days on that mound. Among the people who survived, watched what was going on. Now, this is Genesis 1, also can be used at this point because we're going to talk about some things that, well, let's go back to the idea of a tell and light. This is a creation caused by restarting. Now, a restarting can also be called a tell, when worlds end and new ones begin. We always look at chapter 1 in Genesis and we see Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 as two examples of God beginning this earth, when in actuality, Genesis chapter 1 is not about starting this particular civilization, but it's talking about the restarting of a civilization. Genesis 1 is what happens when worlds begin. Ezekiel is placed between them. I believe that is why he is called Ben Adam. Now he stands where Adam once stood, between flood and future, between ruin and renewal, between silence and speech. Tel Aviv is a geological, theological memory set in a prophetic position. It's Ezekiel's classroom. And again, it's telling something quite profound. Now, that redemption does not begin on a clean ground. In fact, if you read some of the commentaries, it's talking about 974 generations before Adam. In other words, multiple tells. 7 days hints of the Shiva, which is the idea of a formal mourning, that was created for the purpose of being close. Now, it's Genesis 1 in the creation cycle, as well as the preparation period for receiving the Torah at Sinai. Ezekiel does nothing. No preaching, no rebuking, no visions. It's what I would call an incubation period. Now, before he can speak God's words, he must feel Israel's condition from the inside. A prophet does not speak at the people. He speaks from within their exile. Now, we read in 3:16 to 21 that God had made him a watchman for the house of Israel. Now, a watchman stands between danger and the city. He is expected to see what others cannot. A watchman was judged not by outcome, but by faithfulness. And this may be the radical idea, but Ezekiel is responsible for warning the people. He is not responsible for bringing them to repentance. He resolves this actually resolves the massive theological problem regarding free will. The divine justices are about preserving life. But while prophetic information is often about despair or the acknowledgement of something terrible. Now, Kabbalistically, this places Ezekiel in the realm of Geburah, judgment, somewhere between that and Hesed, which is peace or mercy. Now, he must speak judgment, but the very act of warning is called mercy. Now, silence on his part becomes guilt. You see, speech becomes life-saving, even if it's rejected. So Ezekiel had to speak. He had to give advice, but it was all based upon the fact that man he could choose not to. Now, the strangest and most important part comes here in 3:22 to 27. They shall put ropes upon you, and you shall not go out among them. Now, this is not metaphorical, as God restricts the prophet. I will make your tongue cling to the roof of your mouth. But when I speak with you, I will open your mouth. This is kind of evolutionary or revolutionary. Ezekiel is not a freelance moralist. He is not allowed to speak whenever he feels moved. Speech itself becomes a divine event. Mystically, the prophet becomes a vessel with a divine value, and speech flows only when the channel is opened from above. Chapter 3 ultimately establishes that Ezekiel is not a comforter, not a reformer. He's not even a nationalist prophet, but he's a watchman, a bearer of exile. He's a conduit whose silence is as holy as his speech. Now, this explains everything that follows. His actions are symbolic. His acts of judgment are physical. Hope only comes later. And the resurrection spoken of in chapter 37 of his book, well, it must come after total silence and death. I want to pause for a moment and integrate Ezekiel with Zechariah and with Daniel. Those were the last three books I've taught on the subject here. What I hope you are sensing is that Ezekiel, Zechariah, and Daniel are not three voices saying different things. They are one revelation seen from three different altitudes, closer and further away. Now think of them as a body. Also think of them as the temple. And also think of them as a book. Now, hopefully the chart will help. Well, I have a chart, but I don't have it up for you. So let me just talk my way through it. We had the three prophets. Ezekiel is embodied in the priesthood. What happens to God's presence when everything collapses? That's Ezekiel. Zechariah is about vision, and it's about the temple. How is the world repaired after collapse? Then Daniel is apocalyptic. How does history itself move towards redemption? So all three are working on the same subject, but not from the same starting place and not from the same, well, they do end in the same place. Ezekiel answers the unbearable question. You see, the temple is still standing when he moves into the land of Babylon. But if the temple is destroyed, where is God? Now, for most of his peers, his answer is really kind of shocking. God moves, God rides, God withdraws, and God enters exile with Israel. Now, so far in our first three themes, the theme of the chariot, the prophet becoming bound to silence and restraint, which embodies prophecy in our story, death must come from resurrection, bones before breath. Ezekiel teaches the people you cannot rebuild until you accept that all the old forms is truly dead. This is why his vision will be empty. It'll be physical and it'll be slow moving. Zechariah picks up after Ezekiel's devastation. And now his story deals with the idea of that now God has returned to Zion. How does healing turn, well, truly, how does it begin? His answer is through vision, not force, through purification, not triumph, through the feminine presence returning, and finally through the temple that is cosmic, not merely architectural. That's why I'm joining the theme that believes that the next temple will actually come from God. Now, key things to think about. In the case of Zechariah, we talk about the menorah and the olive oil and the trees that were planted besides it and that gave it flow, and how it was unrestrained, and how it talks about cleaning up Joshua, who was the high priest at that time, and about silencing Satan, not destroying him, but silencing him. Jerusalem as a spiritual center for all nations, that's yet to come. Zechariah's message was redemption, which will quietly end with destruction. Nothing is rushed. The wounds are still open until the end. Now, Daniel teaches us that history is not chaos as Daniel steps even further back. He asks, if empires rise and fall, is there a pattern, or is it only terror? Now, Daniel's answer is really quite simple. History has measured time as empires, as beasts, not God's. Judgment belongs to the Ancient of Days, and the saints his inheritance. They do not conquer their kingdom. Daniel has key things that he themes on: the sealed books, times and time and a half, angelic meditation or mediation, and resurrection tied to wisdom. Daniel teaches the meaning of history is hidden not because of it's cruel, but because humanity is not ready to understand. Now, the three share a single structure: silence, vision, then interpretation. Ezekiel is muted unless God opens his mouth. Zechariah asks, "What are these?" And then Daniel tells us, "I do not, or I did not understand, but kept the matter sealed." I think all three insist on human understanding and the fact that it's often staged. Each prophet highlights in his own way God's assessment from the earth toward the heavens, an interface and the throne of God. Now, Ezekiel is about glory leaving the temple, and in doing so, it ascends. Zechariah mentions the menorah that stands between the heavens and the earth. And then Daniel, well, court convenes above the history itself. So, in other words, when you see Daniel and you see the throne and the Ancient of Days sitting on it, he's sitting in that in between. Now, this is the deepest integration. Redemption always follows this order. Ezekiel begins by saying it's dry bones, silence, graves. It's about death. Zechariah talks about filthy garments that are being removed. In other words, purification is coming. And Daniel, when he who sleep shall cause them to awake, speaks of resurrection, which is his final chapter. Now, all three prophets are watchers, but in different realms. Ezekiel watches his people. Zechariah watches the temple. Now, Daniel watches time itself, but each are having a different point of view. Now, this echoes the Watcher's tradition in the Second Temple literature. I need to, I need to pause here for a moment. If I rush forward, Ezekiel would, it'd feel unbearable. Zechariah would feel symbolic but thin, and Daniel would feel terrifying. But together, if we understand that Ezekiel is intended to ground us, and Zechariah is intended to heal us, and Daniel is intended to orient us, well, we are not just studying text. We are being trained to see text from multiple worlds, from multiple points of view. Now, I want to go back to Genesis 1. It should look different now because you are no longer reading it cosmologically, but it's actually chariot architecture. Three questions of this topic. What is the Merkavah? How Genesis 1 maps out into it, and how Ezekiel, Zechariah, and Daniel conform or confirm the map. Now, we need to take this slow. This is a holy ground, and we're going to be studying on it for over a year, if I map this out correctly. But the Merkavah is not a vehicle, but a structure of reality. The Merkavah, a chariot, is how divine presence interfaces with the created worlds. It has 4 layers, traditionally seen as the wheels, as living beings, as firmament, and as the throne. But more precisely, it is the vertical axis flowing from the Ein Sof, the incomprehensible one, to form, well, to form, to motion, and finally to manifest. This is why Ezekiel doesn't travel in the chariot. He's witnessing how God moves within creation. Genesis 1 is not what happened once. It is what is always happening. We can map it layer by layer. In fact, let's do some. On day 1, we read that let there be light. Now, this is not sunlight. In fact, it's called organuz, concealed light. The Merkava, or the Keter level, the highest level of our story, deals with the one aspect, the ultimate top. We're talking about a throne. We're talking about will. Now, this corresponds to Daniel's Ancient of Days. Ezekiel's radiance, like the Hashmal, the electrum, and Zechariah's divine speech initiating return. Well, light precedes form. Intention precedes structure. Now, day 2, we find rakia, firmament. Let there be a rakia, a firmament separating the waters above from the waters below. Now, this is the most Merkava critical verse in the Torah. Rakia is not sky. It's the membrane that we interface between the two. It's the firmament above the living beings. In Ezekiel, above the heads of the living beings was something like firmament, awesome and crystalline. Now, this is where divine will actually slows down into what we call intelligence, where prophecy becomes possible, and where chaos is held without being erased. We see day to day not as being good or like any of the other days, but it was good in its own way, because separation is painful. And here we find the separation between the waters above from the waters below. But we have to understand it may be painful, but it's also necessary. Now, land emerges from the waters. God dries the land, and vegetation can be seen. Now, this is the Merkava level. It's the level of the Hayot. It's the level of the living beings. Life begins to stand. Boundaries are, well, they're lost in the growth. This corresponds to Ezekiel's creatures standing straight. Zechariah's olive trees are feeding the menorah, making this the first hint of agencies within creation. So we're beginning to see from this point actual life. We're beginning to see boundaries. We're beginning to see things, well, standing. We're bound to see creation and life. Now, day 4, well, that's about luminaries. It's about sun, moon, and stars. And this seems, well, it's out of order, because you need light in order for vegetation. Well, you also need it because of the idea of plants growing upright. This is the Merkava level of Ophanim, the wheels. Ophanim governs time. It governs cycles. It's about seasons, and it's about history. Daniel lives here. Beasts rise and fall. That's that chapter 7, which deals with all of the animals. Times are measured. Stars are both physical and angelic. And this is why Daniel is obsessed with times, and half a time. He's reading the wheels. Now, day 5, well, this day is about birds and fish, creatures of the air and creatures of the sea. These creatures cross boundaries. Here, the Merkava functions as a messenger and a transitioner. What can cross boundaries? Well, think of the angels, and think of dreams, and think of, well, visions. And the prophets will be transitioning over this. Ezekiel is listed by the Spirit, or is lifted by the Spirit. Zechariah says, "What are these?" And Daniel simply replies, the visions I just cannot interpret. Daniel 6 is about humanity. Let us make Adam, it actually is man, but Adam, in our image. Adam is not on the Merkava. Adam is meant to be its conscious node. Conscious node. Again, I need to slow down and explain what I mean by conscious node. When I said a dangerous or a conscious node on day 6, I meant humanity is created to be the point where all layers of the Merkava meet knowingly. Let me unpack that a little bit. A node is not a ruler. A node is not a spectator. It's a junction. It's a relay point. It's a place where flows meet and can be directed or redirected. Now, in a network, a node doesn't generate the current it receives or interprets or passes on. So Adam is not the source of creation. Adam is a node. He's an interface. And what makes it conscious? Before day 6, light listed or existed, but it didn't reflect on itself. Time moves, but doesn't ask why, and life grows, but it doesn't choose. But on day 6, something unprecedented occurs, and that's the being that can recognize the flow that's going on inside. Adam is dust. Adam is breath. He's divine. He's capable of speech and morally responsible. Now, that combination exists nowhere else in Genesis 1. This is why the Torah shifts language. Let us make man, Adam, not because of plurality. God is not multiple, God is one, but because all prior layers are being gathered into one being, Adam. And it's doing it simultaneously. On day 1, the intent is light. Adam can know and he can name. Light becomes intelligible. Firmament separation, that's day 2. Adam lives between heaven and earth, spirit and body. On day 3 is about life and growth. Adam tends the garden. Life becomes purposeful. On day 5, time and cycles are present. Adam marks days, he marks seasons, memory, covenants. And day 5 is about movement or messaging. Adam dreams, receives, speaks, transmits. Now, no animal holds all 5 at once, except for Adam. He is in the image of God. Now, the picture sharpens as the title does when we use the term Netzlim Elohim. Now, it probably doesn't mean much to you unless you know Hebrew. And then it says, like or looks like God. It means he is capable of representing God. He's capable of responding to God. He's capable of restraining or even releasing divine flow. He is terrifyingly powerful. That is why speech creates and destroys worlds. Choice fractures or heals reality. And silence can be obedience or it can be failure. Ezekiel embodies this risk. He is a conscious node with a mouth that is bound shut. So, why does sin break the Merkava, these 4 levels? Well, the first human failure is not about curiosity on a mystical level. It's about misrouting. Adam and Eve do not wait for flow. They seize it. They attempt to ascend without permission. That's what Babel was about. They want knowledge without integration and light without vessels or boundaries of any kind. Now, the result of their choice was separation intensified. Time became toil. Death enters as a fragmentation. The node goes offline. It's not erased, it's just damaged. So this brings us right back to Ezekiel, Zechariah, and Daniel. Ezekiel was an abundance without free speech. Zechariah shows us vision with questioning. Now, Daniel shows us the understanding can be delayed and sealed. Each touches part of Adam's original function. None hold it fully. They are repair signals, not repair itself. And to the human, it is to stand at a crossing where heaven's intentions and earth's reality, they do meet. And then you choose how the flow continues. That is what conscious node is about. Not domination, not enlightenment, but responsibility. This is why Ezekiel is called the son of man, or the son of Adam. He is humanity reinserted into the chariot system. Okay, let's look at day 7, Shabbat. On that day, there was no creation, only that which was present. This is about Merkabah's completion, resting of the throne. The chariot does not move. The king is at home. This is why exile is unbearable. Shabbat without the resting place fractures in reality. Notice how the prophets confirm the map. Now watch the convergence. Ezekiel is going to tell us what he sees, the layers all at once. Watches the throne depart. He embodies exile physicality. Well, Genesis 1 is reverse creation. It's undone because it needs to be renewed. Zechariah stands between the firmament and the earth. The menorah channels oil without force, and Satan is restrained, not destroyed. This is day 3 and 4, the idea of repair. Life flows again, and time stabilizes. Daniel sees a wheel and the court. Books are open, time is measured, and resurrection promised. This is why Ezekiel must go silent, why Zechariah must ask questions, and why Daniel must seal his book. They're not confused. They are aligning themselves to different layers of the same structure. That makes complete sense if you watch them that way. And this is the kind of material that, well, it's meant to sync, not stack. Now we've reached the end of chapter 3, and Ezekiel is no longer being prepared. He's now going to be deployed. Chapter 1 to 3 speaks of his calling and the commissioning. What comes next is it's not more visions, it's action. Strange, uncomfortable physical action. Ezekiel 4 to 7, well, it's going to be referred to as the siege of cycles. These chapters form a unit. They're not random signs. They are a sustained prophetic drama. But more about that next week. I'm finished for tonight. Hopefully we can get through chapter 4 next week, because that was what I tried to create a goal for. So at this point, I want to say shalom. By the way, if you want copies of my notes of these chapters, I'm glad to send them to you. You just have to write me, and my name, Steve Van Brani, small letters, at gmail.com will get to me. And from there, I will send you my notes and put you on my eternal mailing list. Not really, but anyway, I will give you the opportunity. So thank you for listening. I hope you all have a good week. Don't forget tomorrow, Thursday, Rod's talking again. We're working on the Parsha Mishpatim. So, Shalom, Laila Tov.
Very, very good. I have to make a correction tomorrow. I'm in New York right now, so I'm supposed to be doing a podcast tomorrow on the Meaningful People podcast at 11. They moved it to 11. And then I'm speaking at a shul on Saturday. So I'm going to be here the whole weekend. Great opportunity for us to sort of promote what's going on in the world of the Noahide. But I had a question for you.
Okay.
You were talking about the firmament, Rakia,
Yeah,
on
Rakia.
Rakia. So Rakia isn't that the the space that separates physicality from the divine or from the other side, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Correct?
Yeah, science uses the concept of the atmosphere. As soon as you run
Right,
out of spheres, then that's when you reach Rakia. And then
right.
from there, that's just simplest
But
space.
but the idea, the spiritual concept of it is that there's also this is also the representation of that which separates us from the that
Heavenly.
divine space, the heavenly space. Okay, I
Correct.
just I just wanted to get clear. That was very good. I appreciate that. Sorry for coming in late. I literally just walked into the hotel room and tried to get my stuff together so I can get online. So
Well, I'm glad you came to listen. I don't know who's
I
talking
am
tomorrow
so
then.
happy I did. Rabbi Avner will be speaking tomorrow.
Okay. I appreciate knowing. Anyway,
Yeah,
anybody have anything to say? Why do I get the quiet people?
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, no, I have never connected those three books ever in my mind. I always read them as separate and didn't understand a tenth of it, but this is helping.
No, I'm glad because I it wasn't until we were finishing the second one and I was asking everybody, well, what should I talk about the third one? Then all of a sudden it dawned on me that Ezekiel was, I had taught it to the Sunday morning people, but I hadn't shared it with anybody else. Now, if you've been listening, you'll notice there's very little that resembles what I talked about the first time, which was actually the third time I've taught it. So every time I change, but I think it's because God continues to open doors and allowing me to see things and to read things. My wife asked me, well, where did I get all my notes and my thoughts? Well, some of them are from personal experience, going to tell Tamar. That's personal experience. But there's also what I watch on television, the story of the nations, and putting together how the nations rise and fall, what they go through, that whole process, which I tried to explain, but I probably didn't do a good enough job. But look at all the things that are being written. And I have a couple books on the shelf behind me. I don't know if you can see them, but anyway, I'm I'm reading the book, The War Scroll. I don't know if you know what the War Scroll is. It's from the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's the battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. It was written with the intention that the sons of light were the righteous, the sons of darkness was the Roman Empire. But the same thing applies all the way through. We're watching we're watching reruns of an old movie. Now we run out of Jewish understanding for a while, but now we're picking back up again. And the empires are coming back. We're watching Rome. We're watching Russia. We're watching these things come back again, which I think is very fascinating. So I'm grabbing things from all over, but I have my green book here and that's carrying me for quite a ways. But I also have been using the Zohar and some of the things that I have previously read in the Midrashic writings. So that's where my stories are coming from. But like I said, you really don't want to get in my head because it's all confused and muddled up there. It it's a very lonely place trying to find my way out.
Are you kidding? I almost drowned, but I'm still here because it's so deep. there's too many new concepts for me,
Well,
but I'm working on it.
well, I think it's the problem is the fact that we grew up Christian. We um, we were so we knew everything, and we knew the Jews were wrong and that we were right. And after that, it didn't matter. But it's so hard to put all that away. And that's why I used to say when I was teaching Sunday school that I was killing um, sacred cows every week. And if you think about it, I was doing it for years. Well, now I'm trying to do in less years, undoing everything that I said before. Not everything, but I've reframed everything. I think that's probably a better way of saying it. So,
Yeah.
and actually, Laura, you have that religious mentality because you work so often and hard in that whole field of building of churches and all of the other gatherings. So you got a lot of cows to kill. You
Well,
haven't.
and the funny thing is, because we did Baptist, Methodist, Christian Missionary Alliance, all the different ones, we weren't in just one. And then growing up under the brother Sumrall, who loved Israel with a passion and studied under several people over there, uh, I might not have as many cows as you do. I just didn't have as much knowledge as you do. I mean,
Well,
I taught Sunday school for 4 and 5 year olds. I didn't do adults. So, yeah,
Mhm.
I had less to kill than you did, probably, but I didn't know as much.
my third grade Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Whitecamp, who Bob and Deb know, she told me I was going to be a preacher. I said, well, there's no way I'm going to do that because I don't like to talk. So I decided to become a teacher instead, so I don't have to
Right,
talk as much. So
right.
yeah, because preachers, they don't talk long. They got a 20-minute spotlight that they got to hit because otherwise we all get up and leave. So, but if you're a teacher, you close the door, they can't get out, and then you just keep teaching. So makes me different. But anyway, anybody? Well, Mary, I'm glad you were able to handle it and make it all the way through. Uh, Rod, do you know that she's cancer free?
Yeah, I she sent me a text. It's funny because yesterday I was about to send her a text and say, "Hey, what's the latest?" And boom, she sent me a text. That's sort of the synchronicity that takes place amongst people in
Yep.
our community. And she told me, and I was like, God, that's amazing because that very morning I spent my gratitude just thanking miracle in my life. And when I say in my life, I witnessed a miracle, and we've got to elevate that to the place that it really is, an amazing testament to death, cancer, and recovery and revival. It's just amazing. So I am just
Well,
so happy for Mary.
she's not on TV, I mean, on the camera because of the fact she's getting rid of that cancerous material inside of her.
Yep.
We get to see a
Well,
picture of her.
yeah. Well,
There's a
that's
face.
good enough for now.
That was good enough.
Yeah, it was a
There you go.
wonderful.
Whoa,
I'm sideways. Wow.
you're sideways.
It was a wonderful feeling. She was doing her testing. I had taken a sample of what was being expelled from the body, and the computer just, bam, it just come up on the computer screen. Benign tumor was what she was testing. So it's like that. That's proof.
Yep. So she has her burial plans locked away because she doesn't need them right now. So
Now,
life
been
is
needing it
good.
for a while. But at times this burns like hot coals.
Yep.
So prayers still are appreciated and necessary.
Well, when
But
I went to Africa, I learned a new phrase. Wana Safiwe. God bless.
Yes.
God
Well
bless.
said.
Yep.
I stick with Gonzula Tova.
So
All is for my good.
all is for your good.
Alex, take care, man. Thank you.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Have
Shalom,
a good
shalom.
night.
Good
See you
Shalom.
rest.
guys in the morning. Bye
Yep.
bye.
Shalom, shalom.